October the 1st, 2009 marks the 5th anniversary of my husband, Jim Calvert's fatal heart attack in front of police headquarters, 40 College Street, Toronto. I mark these anniversaries by holding a vigil in that place because from my first contact with the police, just a few hours after it happened, to this day, the accounts given by police about their response to what was a medical emergency have been inconsistent, varying from half-truths and evasions to outright lies. Jim was found turning blue by 3 police officers about 15 minutes after he and I parted company several blocks away. Instead of putting their first aid training to use and performing CPR or employing one of the defibrillators with which they are equipped, they decided that my casually dressed husband, who was heading to a community gardening convention around the corner at the Courtyard Marriott Hotel, was a deceased street person, and from that point on, I believe they went on to violate at least 16 regulations from their policy and procedures manual, from how they handled the initial emergency to the subsequent reportage and cover-up in the hours and weeks that followed. This event occurred under the leadership of Chief Fantino, who I believe was probably behind the initial lies that I was told a few hours afterwards, that Jim was found VSA, or vital signs absent, which I was later told was not the case. I don't know which version to believe. That he was found by a civilian bystander. It was actually 3 police officers, 2 of whom were sergeants or staff sergeants. They admitted 9 months later, and only because the truth was evident in the recording of the 911 call. There were other aspects to this that were troubling, including the fact that police are not supposed to pronounce death unless it is obvious, as in the case of decomposition or decapitation, that none of the officers on the scene placed the 911 call, but one of them went into the building and explained the situation of a deceased street person to another officer at the desk who finally placed the call. Meanwhile, no life-saving attempts were being made on my dying or dead husband. No police officer accompanied Jim to hospital despite it being required for a living patient, which they claim they believe he was, etc. I believe this was a case of passive euthanasia. He's too far gone, it's no use, based on the assumption that a street person's life was somehow not a matter of great urgency. In the years that followed, I had various occasions to attend the headquarters, dropping off or picking up correspondence, meetings, etc., and I was to experience the difference in reception I could expect at the front desk, depending on how daintily I was dressed and coiffed. I also recently had the sad honor of singing at the memorial for Paul Crouch, a homeless man who was beaten to death by a couple of soldiers. This horrible event occurred less than a year after Jim died, shortly after police had finally produced the results of their whitewash investigation concerning Jim. I wonder whether, had they been more forthcoming about what had really happened to Jim, could there have been more public awareness raised about street persons, and perhaps the soldiers who killed Mr. Crouch might have reconsidered their contempt before they crossed the line. I spoke to Chief Blair, who attended Mr. Crouch's memorial, letting him know that I was still waiting for the truth about what happened to Jim. He had nothing new to say, but expresses the view that it is all settled. My husband's sudden death was treated as suspicious, requiring an autopsy. In fact, I was not even allowed to touch him until after his autopsy. Yet, once the contributing factors of police incompetence and misconduct were pointed out to them, they seemed to lose all interest. If this is how the force deals with a suspicious death, we should all be worried. The fact is, Larry Straver, Scott Weedmark, and Darla Tannehill have all been promoted since Jim died, And who knows, maybe they are better cops from what they learned from the experience. But you cannot change what you don't acknowledge. I cannot forgive and forget something if I don't know exactly what I am forgiving or forgetting, and if I don't know whether the Toronto Police Service has learned from the tragedy. Every day I relive the trauma of hearing the worst news of my life, that my husband had died, and knowing that there was something terribly wrong even with what I was being told. Uncertainty followed even about the participation of the victim services support staff, who I now realize were probably not even aware that they were participating in a lie. We know that police employ sting operations, give false information to criminals being interrogated, etc. But it had not occurred to me that police would lie about a non-criminal matter, and when there was no law and order related justification for doing so. It seems obvious that the only reason they might have had for doing so relates to the fact that they knew they had messed up badly and were determined to cover it up. The cops that do save people's lives or make a reasonable effort sometimes appear on the 6 o'clock news. For those who have an interest in the case, other details, including the actual police report, inquest brief, unsuccessful so far, and the correspondence with the Ombudsman of Ontario, will be posted on a website in the coming weeks. I actively invite all aspects of the case to be a part of the public record, that something useful can be learned from it. I am Maria Kasstan, and I can be reached at gmail.com, mariakasstan@gmail.com. And the website, when it is complete, will be the Jim Calvert Memorial website. Thank you.